The second type of mode of data transfer is interrupt initiated IO or interrupt driven. That is, we shall see some interrupt is involved. So IO devices has a provision that is interrupt signals to inform the CPU about communication. Means IO devices will send the interrupt signals to CPU whenever they want to transfer some data. So in this, CPU time is not wasted because it is not asking every device, only whichever device want to transfer data. If they have prepared the data, then only they can transfer. So the CPU time is saved. Now what is the analogy with respect to taking attendance? Suppose teacher has arrived first to the class, and whenever each student is coming, the teacher is getting interrupted, like he or she has to make an entry in his register, in his or her register. So whenever the students come, the teacher is interrupted and he or she makes a entry in her attendance. So similarly, each input output device is a student for which we are making the change in the, means the CPU is making change in the memory. So what happens when a CPU receives an interrupt? Means what are the steps involved? So means what is the sequence of steps? First, what we do, whatever CPU was doing, it will complete its instruction. Suppose teacher was writing something on the board, then he or she will finish that line. Then the CPU will save the status of the current process onto the stack. Then branch will be changed to ISR or PC changes to interrupt service subroutine. Then it will execute ISR and then resume back to whatever process it was executing. So analogy for this is, if the teacher was writing something on blackboard and a student comes, then the teacher will finish whatever he or she was writing on the blackboard. Then he will keep a bookmark, like in what line from the notes or the book he or she was referring to, he will keep the bookmark. Branches to ISR. What is ISR? ISR means interrupt service subroutine. That is routine or function or procedure which is executed when when the CPU gets any interrupt. So what exactly gets executed? Now it helps the IO device to transfer the data. Okay, so when the teacher has bookmarked whatever he or she was referring to, then it will change to ISR, means he will follow the procedure required to register in his or her attendance register. After updating the attendance register, he or she shall resume whatever she was writing on the blackboard. So, and it is said that the address of ISR is vector address. So what is the time required in interrupt IO? We can see time required is interrupt overhead. That is, before we execute ISR, we have to do some steps like executing the current instruction, then saving the PC and status. So these all are interrupt overheads, and then running ISR, and then data transfer time, means whatever time is required to transfer the data from input output to memory. So we can say that time taken by programmed IO is greater than time taken by interrupt IO. Why? Now because this one checks for each and every input device, input output device. Suppose if I have many number of devices, so this one becomes greater than the time required for interrupt IO. So these the programmed IO and interrupt IO, where the two connections between IO and the CPU, IO device and CPU were connected, but now in DMA we shall see how IO is connected to memory.